Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere that smells considerably worse than your average modern pub. So dim the lights, fluff the pillow, get comfortable, and let your thoughts drift backward about 700 or 800 years. Imagine the road slowly disappearing beneath your feet. The sounds of traffic fade away. Electric lights vanish. Cell phones are no longer buzzing every few minutes. Nobody is asking you to update your password. Instead, you're walking down a muddy road toward a medieval tavern. And yes, it probably smells exactly the way you're imagining. Maybe even worse. If you enjoy slow history, strange little details, and discovering that people in the Middle Ages were somehow both exactly like us and completely unlike us, you're in the right place. Tonight, we'll spend an evening inside one of medieval Europe's busiest gathering places. We'll meet travelers, merchants, farmers, monks who definitely weren't supposed to be there, professional drinkers who somehow made that into a lifestyle, suspicious innkeepers, exhausted cooks, wandering musicians, and more than a few people making questionable life decisions. Nothing too exciting will happen, mostly because we're trying to fall asleep. So take a slow breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's quietly push open the heavy wooden door. The first thing you notice is not the people, it's the smell. History books love talking about kings, castles, and glorious battles. Very few spend enough time discussing smells, which is probably understandable. Unfortunately, for our imaginary visit, smells are unavoidable. The tavern is filled with wood smoke drifting lazily across the room. Wet wool hangs drying near the fire. Horses are standing just outside. Someone has tracked mud across the floor. Several dogs have wandered inside because apparently nobody believes in keeping dogs outdoors. There's also beer, lots of beer. Some spilled, some fresh, some quietly fermenting in barrels. And somewhere in the corner, someone has definitely forgotten a piece of cheese for longer than they should have. Welcome to medieval hospitality. Now, despite everything we just described, taverns were enormously popular. Because where else were you going to go? There weren't cinemas, no coffee shops, no streaming services asking if you were still watching. If you wanted company, warmth, food, or news from another town, the tavern was where life happened. Even people who couldn't really afford to spend much money often found themselves here, sometimes just to listen. Information traveled remarkably slowly during the Middle Ages. A traveler arriving from 50 miles away might know events nobody in town had heard yet. Imagine someone walking into your local cafe today and casually mentioning that the king had died 3 weeks ago. That sort of thing actually happened. News walked at the speed of tired horses, and occasionally slower. The building itself isn't particularly impressive. Forget polished wooden beams and cozy fantasy taverns from modern television. Real medieval taverns were practical places. The walls might be rough timber or stone. The floor might simply be packed earth. If you're lucky, someone has scattered fresh rushes across it. If you're unlucky, well, let's simply say the rushes were changed less often than anyone would have preferred. People dropped food, ale, bones, or grease, ashes, as occasionally blood from someone cutting meat. Sometimes other substances that polite history books prefer not to mention. Changing the floor covering wasn't exactly today's daily cleaning so eventually everything became one with the earth. which sounds poetic. It wasn't. Now let's look around. Near the fire sits a merchant. He spent 6 days traveling with cloth tied behind 2 stubborn horses. He's exhausted. His boots have become permanent residents of the mud. He isn't looking for luxury. He's looking for warmth, a hot meal, a reasonably clean bed, and perhaps a drink strong enough to make tomorrow's journey seem like someone else's problem. Nearby are local farmers. Harvest has been difficult. Taxes remain unpleasant. Weather continues doing whatever weather feels like doing. Some things never change. The farmers talk quietly, mostly about crops, sometimes about neighbors, occasionally about whether Lord whoever has invented another tax, because of course he has. Medieval rulers displayed remarkable creativity whenever money was involved. At another table sits a priest. Now, officially, many church leaders encouraged moderation. Unofficially, well, priests also enjoyed warm fires and decent ale. Some monasteries brewed excellent beer themselves. The monks became surprisingly skilled brewers. It's amazing what centuries of careful experimentation can accomplish when everyone agrees drinking water is somewhat unreliable. Which brings us to one of history's most misunderstood facts. People often hear that medieval Europeans drank beer instead of water. That's partly true, but also slightly exaggerated. Water existed. People absolutely drank it. The real issue was that clean water depended heavily on where you lived. A fresh spring? Wonderful. A crowded city where everyone dumped waste into the nearest stream? Perhaps choose the ale. Ale brewing involved boiling water during production, making it a safer option in many places. Besides, it tasted better than suspicious brown puddles. The ale itself was different from modern beer, usually weaker, often cloudy, sometimes flavored with herbs instead of hops. Every batch tasted a little different because recipes were not especially standardized. Imagine buying your favorite drink today and discovering it tasted completely different every Tuesday. That was normal. Consistency had not yet become fashionable. Now notice the woman moving efficiently through the room, carrying heavy wooden mugs. She's probably not merely serving drinks. In many medieval taverns, women played major roles managing daily business. Some owned taverns outright. Others brewed ale at home before selling it. For centuries, brewing was frequently considered women's work. Only much later did larger commercial breweries gradually become dominated by men. History has a habit of quietly changing who gets credit for things. Our tavern keeper doesn't have time to think about any of that. She's busy making sure nobody leaves without paying. Which proves one eternal truth. Running hospitality has always involved chasing customers for money. Some traditions survive every century. Meals begin arriving. Nothing particularly glamorous. Stew, bread, cheese, perhaps onions, maybe cabbage. If someone has recently slaughtered an animal, there could even be meat, although not everyone could afford generous portions regularly. The stew has one wonderful advantage. Almost anything fits inside. Vegetables, beans, old meat, fresh meat, yesterday's leftovers, today's leftovers, tomorrow's lunch in progress. The medieval cooking pot rarely enjoyed a day off. Bread accompanies nearly everything. Dark, dense, heavy enough that modern gym enthusiasts might accidentally use it for strength training. Fresh white bread existed, but it generally belonged to wealthier tables. Ordinary people often 8-course bread made from whatever grains were available. Sometimes barley, sometimes rye, sometimes mixtures depending on the harvest. Some loaves were excellent, others, let's politely describe them as enthusiastic attempts. As evening continues, conversation grows louder. Someone begins singing, not particularly well. Fortunately, musical perfection has never been required after enough ale. A traveling musician quietly tunes a small instrument nearby. Entertainment during the Middle Ages wasn't something you streamed. People created it themselves. Stories, songs, jokes, local gossip. Everything passed from mouth to ear. Long before podcasts, long before television, long before people argued online about fictional dragons. The human need to tell stories has remained surprisingly consistent. Only the technology keeps changing. Outside, darkness slowly settles across the village. Travel after sunset becomes difficult. Roads aren't exactly illuminated. There are no helpful reflective signs, no convenient fuel stations, only darkness, mud, perhaps wolves depending on where you happen to be. Most sensible travelers simply stayed overnight. The inn portion of the tavern might offer beds, although bed deserves generous interpretation. You could share a mattress with strangers, sometimes several. Privacy wasn't exactly abundant. If you're fortunate, your roommate merely snores. If you're less fortunate, well, let's hope everyone remembered to leave their boots on the floor instead of throwing them. Because cramped sleeping arrangements occasionally produce surprisingly creative disagreements. But that's tomorrow's problem. For tonight, our medieval tavern glows warmly against the cold darkness outside. Candles flicker. The fire crackles softly. Wood creaks as people shift on rough benches. Someone laughs quietly. Someone yawns. Someone orders another mug despite promising 5 minutes earlier that they were definitely heading to bed. History is wonderfully predictable sometimes. And as our evening continues, we'll soon discover what happened when nobles visited taverns, why gambling became almost impossible to avoid, and how one ordinary evening could unexpectedly become the center of an entire community's world. But for now, simply enjoy the warmth. Listen to the quiet conversations. Watch the fire dance across rough wooden walls. And imagine yourself sitting peacefully inside a medieval tavern, where the ale is fresh, the stew is warm, and thankfully, you can't actually smell any of it.